You Don't Know Flack. You Don't Know Flack.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flack, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flack.
Episode 129. The Reno Arcade Collection.
Hello, and welcome to episode 129 of You Don't Know Flack. Today is Sunday, March 23rd, 2013, and I am your host, Rob Flack O'Hara. Today on You Don't Know Flack, we'll be talking about my El Reno Arcade Collection. I got some comments about episode 128, the last episode, about the Commodore 128, and one was just a one-line comment that came off of Twitter from Dr. Quest, Chris. By the way, Dr. Quest is such a badass Twitter handle. I love that. But Dr. Quest said that the introduction to that show it was too long because I call it an introduction. And maybe if I called it something else, like the news and feedback section or something like that, it wouldn't seem so long. But by calling it the introduction, it seems long. And I thought that's a great comment, you know. It's all about managing expectations, right? And so anyway, I'll be talking a little bit about last week. I was on a road trip last week for work. But while I was in a hotel, I spent some time playing Commodore 64 games. And for some reason on my emulator, I had turned off the turbo mode, which I normally turn on when I'm loading games. So I had started a game loading and went to the bathroom and then came back and the game was still loading. And my first thought was that the emulator had locked up, and I began looking. And then right as I sat back down, it said ready. And so I realized it hadn't locked up, but it had still been loading, and I had turned off the turbo mode. And that was not uncommon back then. Commodore had notoriously slow disk drives, for all you guys that remember back in the day, and especially if you didn't own a fast load cartridge or something like that. Games could take forever. And about the longest game I found about the longest loading time, I guess, was about 10 minutes for a game. So I've decided that this beginning portion of the podcast is like one of those loading screens. So anyway, if you imagine in your mind, we have now hit load on the podcast, and so this is us chatting while the game is loading, or while the podcast is loading. And as that longest loading screen that I found was about 10 minutes long, the loading screen portion of the podcast will never go past 10 minutes. So if you don't enjoy these little fireside chats that we have at the beginning of the program, you can skip right to the 10-minute mark and jump right into this week's episode. Otherwise, back then we didn't have that option, and so we would often sit around and talk and do something else while games loaded. So anyway, this is the loading screen portion of the podcast, so welcome to that. I'll probably have to come up with a catchier name. The music you hear in the background is the soundtrack from Street Fighter II EX. Street Fighter II Championship Edition is one of the games we'll be talking about this week, so I thought that would be appropriate. Last week was spring break here in Oklahoma, and one of the things my son did during spring break was he attended a Scratch programming class at our school. One of the teachers put that on, and Mason, he's 11, and he spent a lot of time last week. Now, again, I was out of town, but he spent a lot of time programming, and he sent me an email to one of his first Scratch programs. So I was very excited, especially after, right off the heels of the basic programming episode 127. And so I click on the link, and it's a side cutaway view of a guy, and the name of this it's not really a game, there's not much to it, but the name of this little Scratch program is called How Hershey's Kisses Are Made. And so when I fire it up, you got this side view of a guy, and your mouse is controlling a hamburger, and when you drop a hamburger into the guy's mouth, you can watch it go through his digestive system, and then a little Hershey's Kiss comes out his butt, which is good 11-year-old humor, I guess. But so anyway, Maybe someday when Mason does a podcast, he'll think back on the first program he wrote. And then like a sweet dinosaur trivia game written in BASIC, such as myself, he can talk about his little animated poop game. So there you go. As I mentioned, I did spend a couple days last week in Washington, D.C. If you don't know, I work for a government agency whose primary mission in life is to ensure the safety of airplane travel, which makes it ironic that I really hate flying. And I will avoid flying as much as possible. So this trip was kind of short notice, so I had the option of taking a flight that I didn't want or driving to Washington, D.C. So I chose to drive to Washington, D.C., which, according to Google Maps, is about 1,350 miles away and can be done in just under 20 hours. So on the way out there, I did the trip in 2 days. I stopped in a hotel the first night. That's where I recorded episode 128 of You Don't Know Flack. And then drove into D.C. Then on the way back, I actually drove straight through on the way back. I made it in just over 22 hours, which is not safe and a ridiculous thing to do. I highly do not recommend you do that. But anyway, one of the things I did to keep myself entertained during that trip was listen to podcasts. And of course, I have all the podcasts that I've been mentioning up to date, which is a problem when you go on a road trip. You don't have anything to listen to. I'd already caught up on all the episodes of the 2600 Game by Game podcast, Earl Green's Escape Pod, No Quarter. A couple of new podcasts I found was, I think I mentioned this in the hotel, I found Doug McCoy's Found Footage Films podcast, which is a podcast about movies like The Blair Witch, where in the movie they have found footage left behind by someone who has been killed or murdered or disappeared. He talks about those movies. I also found the Adventure Club podcast, which is run by a couple of guys, Guy Hutchison and John Jay, and actually I'm going to be on the Adventure Club podcast next week, so if you watch Facebook or the website, I'll announce when that's going to be. I also found a lot of podcasts that I think do false advertising. Like I found one podcast, and I'm going to say it's called something like The Last Quarter in the Arcade or something like that. I just searched for terms like, you know, arcade, retro games, stuff like that. So I find this podcast, and it's called something like that, Last Quarter in the Arcade. And I'm sure it's a good podcast. I'm not blasting the podcast. But I listened to 2 or 3 episodes, and they never mentioned an arcade game. So, I mean, they talked about PC and console games and newer ones. So, I added a lot of podcasts during the trip that I ended up deleting. So, but anyway, I did catch up on some podcasts last week. I also took 2... one was a Valentine's Day gift I bought for myself, and one was a Christmas present. For Valentine's Day, I bought myself a Super Nintendo style USB gamepad, which plugs into your PC and you can play games with it. So I took that with me on the trip. It works great with MAME and with the Commodore 64 emulators. Also for Christmas, I got the 8-bitty iCade Bluetooth gamepad, which is compatible with the iCade, so it's made to work with the iPad, and it works with Android tablets. And there are lots of games that support it, but it's instead of being like the iCade, like the whole cabinet, it's just a gamepad that you hold. It looks like an old NES. It's styled like an NES gamepad, but it has 4 buttons instead of 2, and it also has 2 shoulder buttons. But I got it working very quickly with iMAME on the iPad and the Atari Classic Collection. So that was cool. Played with that. I want to mention that this episode, we have a sponsor for this episode who goes by the name of Hex Crasher, and Hex Crasher runs arcadeperfect.net. So if you haven't checked that website out, go check out arcadeperfect.net. You can find Hex on Twitter at twitter.com/arcade_perfect. Arcade Perfect has lots of pictures and articles about current and old arcades. So if you're into the arcade scene at all, and you want to see pictures of current and retro arcades, there's some super cool stuff on there. And actually, I have a guest article that I'm working on for them. So be sure to check out arcadeperfect.net. And speaking of arcades, it looks like the podcast has finished loading. So I'm going to type run here on my trusty Commodore 64. And that will get us started on episode 129 of You Don't Know Flack, my arcade collection in El Reno, Oklahoma. So I had to work backwards from the story I wanted to tell this week to where the story begins. And unfortunately, this story begins with the passing away of my father-in-law in 1993. Now, he wasn't my father-in-law then because I wasn't married yet. Susan and I were still dating. But her dad passed away from cancer in 1993. And in late 1993 or maybe early 1994, my wife's mother got a life insurance settlement in the mid five-figure range, let's say. So now somehow my wife and I didn't get any of this money, which is to be expected. I mean, that's how it works, I guess. But my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, did get the money and began spending the money. And so she would take my wife and they would go shopping. And then my mother-in-law, I guess, just wanted, companionship at that time. She wasn't buying things necessarily for my wife or myself. But so anyway, she picked my wife up one day and they were going to go to an auction. Now, at this time, this is 1994, and my wife and I are living in a mobile home. I talked a little bit about this in the first episode of You Don't Know Flack, but my mother-in-law had purchased a mobile home for my wife to live in while she was going to college. And so I moved in, and I kind of messed up all the plans for everybody, I think. But so I moved in, and this is the mobile home that I had purchased. It's where we were living when I purchased my first arcade game, which was Elevator Action. And I told this story, like I said, in the first episode, but if you haven't listened to that episode, to make a long story short, in the local newspaper, I found an Elevator Action for sale for $200, and I hit my buddy Jeff up about it and asked him what he thought, and he thought it was such a great idea that he would pay half. So we split the price of Elevator Action. We each paid $100, and so I went and got it with my truck and brought it home and backed the truck right up to the front door of the mobile home, stood the game up, so now it was inside the house, and I put it on an old skateboard and wheeled it to the dining room, and I stuck it, my wife had this little table that she had a plant on, and I moved the table, and I put the arcade game in the corner of the dining room, and then the plant that was on the table I put on top of the arcade game to, I don't know if I was trying to hide it or just make it look like it fit in. But she was totally cool about the whole thing. And so for a while we had an Elevator Action arcade game in the corner of the dining room in our mobile home. So, I mean, there's no part of this story really that doesn't say classy, I'm thinking. But so anyway, my wife and her mother leave one morning to go to an auction, and I'm perfectly happy in our little mobile home, and my wife comes home and says, well, we bought something at the auction. And I said, well, what did you buy? And she said, well, we bought a house. And I said, well, we can't afford to buy a house right now. I was working at Best Buy and making like $6 an hour, something like that. And she says, no, well, my mom actually bought two houses, and they're on the same property, and they're in a town called El Reno, which is about 15 minutes west of where we were living. So the agreement was that my mother-in-law would carry the note or whatever for these houses. Actually, no, I mean, she paid cash for the houses, but the deal was that we would pay her rent. And so the two houses together, both houses, were $75,000. So we figured that, that the houses were comparable, so that the house would cost us $37,500. So I think that figured out to be like $300 a month rent for 10 years, and then we would own the house. So we go out and look at the house that we've apparently purchased. This is an odd way to go house shopping, to buy a house and then go look at it, right? So we go out to the house, and the house was built in 1880, which for listeners on the East Coast, that might not seem, I mean, it's old, I'm sure, but it's not that old. But 1880 is 27 years before Oklahoma was a state. So that's pretty old around here. El Reno is named because it's near Fort Reno, which is a military fort, which was located right off of Route 66. So Route 66 runs through the town I live in and grew up in, Yukon, Oklahoma, but it also runs through El Reno. So this house was originally, I would say, like perfectly square. And it was 2 stories. So it was a square house, and then on top of it was another square house. And each of these had 4 rooms. But what had happened over time is that the house had been added onto to make apartments, I guess, because El Reno is also a college town. So the house had 2 additional apartments built on, one in the rear of the house, and then one kind of to the side of the house, which the add-ons were more modern, I guess. So, and by modern, I mean like, say 1950s, maybe. So we go look at the house, and the entire house is divided up into these separate apartments. So they said that the house was a little over 3,000 square foot, which was gigantic to us. My house, the mobile home, was 14 feet wide. So 3,000 square foot seemed pretty big. And so but it was still divided up into apartments. So the area, each area had its own living room, so we had 4 living rooms, we had 4 kitchens, we had 4 dining rooms, and then we had 4 bedrooms. So 3 of those were downstairs, and then there was a 4th that was upstairs. So that's 16 rooms. Plus, then in the rear upstairs, they had built a big, giant studio apartment that you could get to either from outside or from inside the house. And it didn't have a bathroom. It was just one big, giant room. But it did have, like, a sink and things like that. I think I only went in that room, like, once. Maybe once or twice. I don't know. But, so, the 2 of us, my wife and I, we ended up moving into this house. And, we went from a trailer, 3-bedroom trailer with 2 pretty small rooms and a master bedroom and just a normal trailer, I guess, to a house with 17 rooms. So we honestly didn't know what to do with all that space. At one point we had a dirty clothes room. We just had one room where we put our dirty clothes. And then the room next to it was like, the shoe room. When you have 17 rooms, you get kind of creative, Now I wouldn't love the house. The house was terrible, but I would love to have an area that's divided up into all those things. So I could have, a Commodore room and an arcade room and a video game room and a computer room. And I'd probably still have a dirty clothes room. Why not? But that's how the house was divided up. So, and not to get too much into the house, but the house was really old, and the newer areas were okay, but the older areas were really rough. Everything, like, there was no showers. We had 4 bathtubs, like the big claw bathtubs that people collect. We had 4 of them, but no shower. And everything ran off of gas, and the gas was always leaking, so the house always smelled like gas. I'm pretty sure somebody has since purchased the house and they fixed it up, and I hope they fixed the gas problem, because I was always afraid that the house was going to blow up. There was no smoking allowed in the house because I was always afraid that it would explode. But anyway, so we move into this house, and it has all these different rooms, right? And So in the main part, we moved into an area that had, it was like one of the more modern areas. We moved into the living room, and actually this area had a window air conditioner, and so that's why we moved into that area, because it was right before the summer. And in the summer in Oklahoma, it's not uncommon to get over 100 degrees. So we moved into that area, but the kitchen attached to that area was pretty old kitchen appliances, and I don't even think they all worked. So right off the living room was a giant kitchen with a bunch of appliances that didn't really work. There was, I think there was a stove. That may have been the only thing in there. There was no fridge in there. I remember that. So we had this giant room right off the living room, and I ended up moving my Elevator Action arcade game in there. So it was like right off the living room, we had a separate room with one arcade game. And around this time, I think my dad pointed it out to me that there was an arcade auction coming up in Oklahoma City. And so my dad and I took his truck and we went to this auction, and I've told this story before, but I know it's in Invading Spaces, and I think I may have retold it even on one of the podcasts. But so we go to the auction. We're going down. If you've never been to an arcade auction, they line up all the games, and you move from game to game, and they auction each game off. So they plug it in, they turn it on, you can see if it comes on or not, and then they sell it, and then they move on to the next game. So one of the games that I saw for sale that day was Mania. And Mania, I've mentioned before, is when I was a kid, I was really into Mid-South wrestling. They had wrestling in this area. We were in Oklahoma, but the Von Erichs were from Texas, and so the Von Erichs, Kerry Von Erich, Kevin Von Erich, David Von Erich, they would come up to Oklahoma. We always saw, saw Jim Duggan, I think he was from this area, Junkyard Dog, all these people, so we would, wrestling was a big deal for me as a kid. I kind of got out of it, but, back then wrestling was big, and so when Mania came out, I played that game a lot. It's a one-player game. There's one at a time. You can alternate players, but it's a wrestling game. And so as they're auctioning games off, I see this, and you have that perception that everybody sees things like you see it. Like I'm like, oh god, everybody's gonna want Mania, but you have to think about the arcade industry at this time. This is the mid-90s, and so there are still arcades open, but they are struggling. And I talked about this again in Invading Spaces, that there are 3 categories of arcade games. There are the early classics, and those games don't ever seem to lose their value. They're starting to now a little bit, but those are the Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Defender, Centipede, Missile Command. Those games that people see, and even if you're not an arcade person, you recognize, what they are. So those are classic games. And then on the opposite spectrum are new games that are money earners, and those are the games that operators want. Those are the games that you put on site and will make you money. So this is whatever, the hunting games, the shooting games, the bowling, the golf, Golden Tee, those type of games are money earners. But there's this big window in between of games that nobody cares about. Now, you might say there are certain games that are collectible because they may have a tie-in, like for a license, like, I had a RoboCop game or a WWF wrestling game. Those are kind of exceptions because they have a market not just for arcade collectors, but also for whatever that tie-in is. Like you might have somebody who's interested in wrestling, interested in a WWF game. But there's so many games during that time that were released in the late 80s, all the way through the 90s that don't have any sort of crossover marketability, that are more or less worthless. I mean, they're worth less than the sum of their parts. You could take a game like Mania, if it works, pull the board out, sell the board, pull the monitor out, get rid of the monitor, convert it to something else, whatever. I mean, as a game, it's not worth that much, but the parts are probably worth more than the game is. But anyway, So I'm at this auction, and I registered just in case. You never know. Some great deal comes up, and we get to Mania. And like I said, I know I'm repeating myself here, but long story short, I ended up getting the Mania game for $25. And it worked. It was missing the graphics, the bezel that go around the monitor. You could actually see into the cabinet around the monitor. But it had the marquee and the control panel and everything else. And it was definitely a conversion cabinet. But yeah, I ended up getting Mania. So I get Mania and I take it home, and now I have 2 arcade games sitting side by side. So now the wheels start turning. Okay, now I'm not a guy that owns an arcade game. Now I'm a guy that buys arcade games. Like, I'm going to have more than 1 arcade game. I have 2, and I have room for more in this little room. And it's funny how arcade game collections tend to fill the space in which you put them. Actually, they always seem to get a little bit bigger than the space that you give them, which has been my experience anyway. So like I said, first game that I had was Elevator Action. I bought that out of a newspaper. I paid $200 for it. That is the 1983 game by Taito. If you are a fan of Elevator Action or don't know that much about Elevator Action, you can check out episode number 10 of the No Quarter podcast, and they played Elevator Action and did the review. So I'm going to talk about, I ended up with 6 games in my little arcade room there in El Reno, Oklahoma. So I'm going to talk about each of those 6 games just briefly. I'm going to talk about, I guess I could say I talk about where I got them, what I paid for them, and what I learned by owning them. So the Elevator Action, like I said, $200, bought it out of a newspaper. I guess what I learned from owning Elevator Action was when I went and picked it up, it was a guy had it in his home arcade, and I had never seen a home arcade. He had a converted garage that they had turned into like a den, but then it was more like a game room, and there was a wall of arcade games. He had a pool table and stuff like that. And I had never seen a home arcade like that before. So really, I don't know that I learned that much from owning that particular machine, except for just that was really my foray into arcade collecting. I mean, that's the first game that I bought by myself. So I did learn a few things the hard way, like about moving it, being prepared. I've said before, when I went to go pick the game up, I didn't have any ropes or tarps or straps or anything like that. I just had a pickup, and I just assumed somehow you would magically throw it in a pickup and it would arrive safely at its destination. And I was very lucky that it did arrive in working order, but yeah, I guess that's what I learned from that one, was just the introduction into the experience. And then Mania, I learned, first of all, I learned that arcade games that there were arcade games that even ones that I liked, that were more or less worthless. I mean, $25, I could, maybe not today, but there was surely a day where I could have eaten $25 worth of Taco Bell. Maybe not in one sitting, but maybe in a day. I mean, $25 is nothing. With the gas prices right now, I just filled up my truck yesterday. It was $90. So, yeah, $25 is nothing. But, so that's really what I learned about Mania, was that you have this middle era of games that may be playable to you, or you may be interested in, but just don't have a market value. So now I have these 2 arcade games sitting side by side, and boy, do I have the bug. I mean, I'll play Mania, and then I'll play Elevator Action. I'm playing these games, and I decide that I need more games. And at this time, this arcade auction was traveling. I think it is what grew into the super auctions that are now mostly in. I know they do them in Dallas quarterly, and there's some other places, but they were traveling, I guess. So that was a smaller scale, but they were doing it in more cities, and they were stopping in Oklahoma City. So about 3 months later, they come through, and I go back, and now I've got the bug, and I've got some cash. I've been saving up my money, and I bought 2 games 3 months later at the next auction. The first of those was Shinobi. Now, I have owned 3 different Shinobi cabinets. I love Shinobi. I mean, it's one of those games, I think, that, what's the phrase? You had to be there. Like, I was so into, and this is probably an upcoming, maybe very soon upcoming topic for You Don't Know Flack, but in the 80s, I was really into the ninja culture or subculture or whatever. I was into the ninja movies. I had a ninja suit. I had foam rubber nunchucks and rubber ninja stars and real stars and a blowgun. I mean, if you were in the Oklahoma area looking for somebody trained to be an assassin, like if you needed, a ninja mission run by an overweight 13-year-old, I was your guy. I could have made that happen. But I was really into the whole ninja thing. I took karate for a lot of years. And so when Shinobi came out, it was a 1987 game released by Sega. And it was like the culmination of all this stuff. I mean, it was 16-bit graphics by Sega. It had great sound, and it had ninjas. And so when I saw that game, I just fell in love with the game Shinobi. And so when I saw it at this arcade, I was like, oh, crap, I love Shinobi. And I paid $25 for Shinobi. So, the auctioneer, when it fired up, the auctioneer said, now it doesn't have sound. He said this game doesn't, for some reason the sound isn't working, but it's probably a loose wire going to the speaker. And I thought, hey, I can fix a loose wire, So, ultimately what I found out about Shinobi, if you want to fast forward, is that Sega, during their 16-bit era, began using what we now refer to as suicide chips. And these are chips that contain, they're encrypted. And the thing that decrypts them runs off of a battery. And this is all mounted to the board. And the reason is because, I guess arcade manufacturers were really worried about their competitors pulling chips off of the board and probably not dumping them like we think of, for preserving them for MAME, but, making bootlegs. This was to protect, from somebody pulling the chips off and making copies of your arcade hardware. So the way that they got around this was they encrypted parts of the board, and the part that decrypted it runs off of a battery, which is connected to the board. So if you pull the chip off of the board, it's no longer decrypted and it doesn't work. So it's a fairly ingenious little protection scheme. The problem with it is that those batteries eventually go bad and that they begin leaking battery acid. And if you look at a Shinobi PCB, the printed circuit board, the chips that run the sound are right underneath the battery. So when you buy a Shinobi machine that doesn't have sound, it is probably not a loose wire that is causing this machine to not have sound. It is probably the fact that the battery is leaking battery acid all over the PCB, which is what happened in the case of my Shinobi. So this causes 2 problems. The first problem is battery acid is now all over the board and it has eaten up the sound chips. Number 2, when that battery completely goes bad, which it probably is since it's leaking battery acid, the game won't work because now the decryption process that is run by the battery no longer works. So not only have you bought a game now that's probably has battery acid damage, but it won't work very much longer. Now there are ways to fix this. I've learned later in life, much later after I owned and got rid of Shinobi. There are unencrypted versions of the chip, so you can pull that chip off and burn a different chip with that unencrypted version of the code and plug that back into the board. That's one way around it. The other way is you can replace those batteries. Now, of course, it's a delicate process because if you remove the battery, the decryption part no longer works. So you have to, jumper another battery in line, remove the old battery, replace it probably with a battery case, and fix it that way. So, but So I finally owned Shinobi, and it had no sound. And to be honest, I didn't care. I love Shinobi so much that I would play Shinobi with or without sound. Didn't matter to me. But I did learn from owning that two things. One, I learned all about the problems of 16-bit Sega games and Shinobi specifically, and the suicide batteries and all that stuff. So I got to learn all that. And the other thing I learned is that sellers, especially auction sellers, will tell you anything. And in a previous episode, I know I have an episode about arcade auctions. So between that episode and the first episode, you may have heard some of these stories. But I went to an arcade auction, and I found a Frogger machine. And long story short, the Frogger machine was completely gutted. I mean, there was nothing in it but dust and ashes. Just completely empty. All the wiring, all the copper, everything had been stripped out of this machine. And so when the auctioneer got to it, they said, well, turn it on. And, obviously when they flipped the switch, nothing happened. And the auctioneer stood there before all of us and said, that game was working earlier today. I don't know what's happened, but, this might be an opportunity to get a working game that might need a small repairs or whatever. Now, that's BS. I mean, it's going to need... if that game was working earlier, I think I joked before, then it was either another miracle, like of biblical proportions, that game was displaying Frogger on a machine with a monitor with no power. Just not possible. That game was not working. So, I've learned. The more you learn about arcade games, especially in when you're buying and selling, going to auctions, it's really to protect you. So the more, like I said, when you see what games are doing, I mean, I'm not saying don't buy a game that doesn't work, but if you know more about repairs and you see a game that's not working, you might know what's going to go into those repairs. I bought a Neo Geo game one time, and not as part of the El Reno collection. But I bought a Neo Geo game at an auction, and the controls didn't work. And I thought, it didn't seem like it was a board issue. It didn't seem like, the board was working, it had sound, it was playing, and the other buttons were working. It was just the joystick. And when I got it home, one of the ground wires had been cut going, and on most control panels, you'll see that the ground wires are just daisy-chained between all the buttons and all the joysticks. So it just goes, from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, all the way back to the ground on the harness. And that ground wire had been cut, which caused all the buttons to stop working. So I found that ground cut, fixed it, and that cabinet worked great. I had it for a long time, and I sold it. It's one of the ones I sold when I moved last year. So that machine worked for 10 years. So by knowing more about games and specific game problems and stuff, like I said, it allows you to know if a repair is going to be within the scope. If you see a dim monitor and a seller tells you, well, it's probably a brightness adjustment. Well, guess what? It's not a brightness adjustment. Or they would have turned it up and they would be charging you more money. It needs a cap kit. And so you just need to weigh inside your head, is that, a time and money and skill investment that you want to put into a game. And a lot of times it is. You can buy cheap games that need small fixes that whatever the seller wasn't able to do, didn't have the time to do, or didn't have the interest in doing. So, but anyway, so that's what I learned about Shinobi, is that a seller will tell you anything to sell you a game. And boy, did they tell me. Probably a wire to the speaker. Yeah, right. So the other game I bought at that auction was Street Fighter 2. Now, I bought this Street Fighter 2, and I didn't check it out before the auction, so they turned it on, I saw it playing or whatever, and I bid, and I think I ended up getting it for $50. So this is a lot of money, $50. I mean, Shinobi is only $25, Mania is only $25, so now I'm really up in my game. I'm moving up into the $50 range, right? And so I'm loading up my games after the auction. Now, at this time, I didn't even have a trailer. We had my dad's pickup. So upright, I could put like 2 games in the bed. So I've already bought Shinobi, and we get that loaded up in there. And now we're doing Street Fighter. So I'm getting a dolly, and I'm getting ready to wheel it out. And this guy comes up to me, and he says, you know, the board in that game's not any good. And I'm like, what? And he says, yeah, you know, there's bad capacitors on there, and the game starts resetting after 5 minutes or something like that. And I'm like, well, why didn't they tell me that? But, you know, the Shinobi thing, I hadn't learned that lesson yet, that the seller will tell you anything, right? So he says, but I have a championship edition Street Fighter 2 board that I was going to, if I got that cabinet, I was going to put this board in it and just make it, you know, it's just a simple JAMA swap. Well, I didn't know what any of that meant, you know, but he said he was selling a Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition board for $50 just for the board by itself. So I ended up paying him $50 for the board. So now I have a cabinet, and then I have another board. So now I have a $100 game. But I get it home, and the first thing I learned is that one of the joysticks won't go a couple of directions. It goes, I don't remember, but let's say it went up and down, but not left and right. So I call my friend Jeff, who, among other things, took electronic repair at Votech at high school. So Jeff comes over, and we figure out how to open a control panel. I'd never opened an arcade game before. We open the panel, and we look at the wiring, and it all looks okay. But what we notice is that when you move the joystick, it hits these little micro switches, which I didn't know how it all worked back then. And the switches, we press it with our fingers, it still doesn't move the players. And so basically we figure out that the switches are bad. And so Jeff went home, and he came back, and he brought one of those old Epix 500XJ joysticks, which now kind of seems like sacrilege to take that apart, knowing how cheap switches are. But I got a stack of those joysticks now, so it's all good. But anyway, we pulled this joystick apart, and I don't know if you remember these. They were the joystick. You kind of held it with your left hand sideways, your hand wrapped around it, and it was black and red, had a red joystick on the top. But inside that, it used the same kind of micro switches, just like what are in arcade games. And so we pulled the switches out of this joystick and put it in the arcade game, replaced them, and it started working. Now, we hadn't changed the board at that point, because I started thinking, well, maybe that guy, you know, was just trying to sell me a board. But sure enough, we played for 5 minutes, and the game would reset, and 5 minutes, and it would reset or lock up. So, you know, I tell Jeff, I said, hey, I got this other board. Now, and keep in mind, this is, for me, this is pre-internet. So there's no, you're not going to hop online and type in, you know, I didn't even know what the word JAMA meant. But, you know, you couldn't get on there and say, you know, what's a JAMA harness? How do I switch thing? We were just like looking at this thing, trying to figure it out. So we look at the connector, the JAMA, and we look at the other board, and it looks like they kind of look like they're the same thing. And so we just unplug one and plug in the other and fire it all up. And sure enough, fixed it all. So I had a Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition game, fully working. We fixed the joystick. That's and we swapped out the board. So everything worked, and we used to play the crap out of that game. I know there are Street Fighter people and there are Mortal Kombat people, and I'll tell you, I'm a Mortal Kombat person. I was way more into Mortal Kombat than I was Street Fighter. But having owned that Street Fighter cabinet, I grew to appreciate it, and I got better at it. But what I learned from that machine was really how machines worked. I mean, that's the first machine that I ever opened. That's the first one that I actually got in there, and we did wiring repairs, and we changed switches out, and we changed the board out, you know. So I was far from an expert. I'm far from an expert now, but that was really the first time I actually opened up a machine. So at that point, I have 4 machines. I've got Elevator Action, Mania, Shinobi, and now Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. And a few months later, I go back to the auction, and there's not as many things at this auction for some reason, but there was one game that caught my eye, and this game was called Power Instinct 2. And Power Instinct 2 is a 1994 fighting game by Atlas. Now remember, this is probably early spring. I mean, this could be as early as like January or February of 1995. So this game is less than a year old, well less than a year old. And I didn't really understand at the time how conversions worked, like why operators would convert machines from one to another. But this game was in a Nintendo Punch-Out cabinet. And it was in the old Nintendo Punch-Out cabinet that had 2 monitors. So not only was this a goofy fighting game, but it was a goofy fighting game that had 2 monitors stacked on top of one another. And so anyway, if you've never seen Power Instinct 2, and by the way, you have never seen Power Instinct 2. I mean, there could be 1 or 2 of you out there, but this game was obscure, and there's a reason why it wasn't popular. This was a fighting game that just had, like, kooky Japanese characters in it. Like, I thought that it was, I honestly thought that it was a offshoot of Sailor Moon at the time. But I guess it's not. I guess it's just its own little characters or whatever. But anyway, I paid $50 for it, which, I mean, now, today, like if I were buying an arcade game and I saw this thing, I would buy it and I would immediately sell the 2 working Nintendo monitors for $50. I mean, I could probably sell them for $100 each for working Nintendo monitors. But anyway, so I had this giant Power Instinct 2, which, by the way, well, I'll talk a little bit more about the photographs that I have of these games here after I talk about the last one. But for years, I couldn't remember the name of this game. I knew that I had it, and I searched for things like Sailor Moon fighting, girls fighting, stuff like that, and I couldn't find it. But I did eventually find an old photograph, or an old picture, I should say, of this arcade game, and that's how I found out what the name was, Power Instinct 2. But anyway, I guess if I learned anything from owning that one, it was just about arcade conversions, how you could take a game. This thing would have been worth a lot more if I would have converted it back to be a Punch-Out machine, I probably could have sold it just the Punch-Out cabinet for more than the $50 I paid for Power Instinct 2, But anyway, so yeah, that I had a goofy Japanese fighting game. I think everybody needs one of those. So that was the 5th game I got, and so I was kind of happy with my little collection of 5 games. And then, as it happens, and you, those of you that have arcade games have probably been through this, somebody contacted me, and it was actually a coworker, who said, I have an arcade game and you can have it. And I said, okay, well, what is it? And he says, well, it's the old game, and it's called Star Wars. And I was like, what? I could have your Star Wars game? And so he told me a story about his parents had gone out of town and left him to house sit. So he was house sitting, and lightning hit their house while he was there. And when it did, it, like, I guess ruined a bunch of their electronics, like it ruined all their TVs, and just a huge power surge. And they had this working arcade game that he said had been in the family for like 10 years, so I don't know if they bought it. I mean, surely they didn't buy it new, but man, this game looked good. I mean, not a scratch on it, just looked beautiful. And he said after the lightning strike, it had quit working. So he said if I wanted it, come get it and I could have it. So I was like, well, yeah, I'll come get it. And I don't think... to me at least, at that time, Star Wars, the arcade game, I mean, I've been collecting Star Wars stuff since I was 4 years old. So I love Star Wars. And I love arcade games. So I definitely wanted this machine. But I don't think, as far as in the collector community, that a Star Wars arcade game had the clout that it has now. It wasn't, I don't think it was like a holy grail back then. But yeah, it was a free arcade game. I'd take that. So I went and picked it up, threw it in my truck, came home, plugged it in. Sure enough, it didn't work. And that damn game sat there. I never looked at it. I never touched it. And when it was time to get rid of this collection, I basically gave it away to a guy. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that too here in a second. But yeah, knowing what I know now, God, it was probably a fuse, or I mean, maybe a capacitor was blown or something. But I bet it would have been a simple fix to fix that game, and it kills me to know that I had it and I never looked at it and I never did anything, But you live and learn, I guess. So now at this point, we're living at this house, and I have my 6 arcade games, including the Star Wars one, which doesn't work. And at that time, I had got hired on as a contractor, a government contractor. So now I'd been, at this point, I'm making like $10 an hour, which is super big time for me. And I'm doing all this work, and I'm traveling out to different offices. And one office I traveled out to was in Spokane, Washington. And Spokane, Washington was a satellite office off of Seattle. If you know your Washington topology or your locations in the state of Washington, you'll know that Seattle is all the way on the west coast and Spokane is all the way on the east coast. So they're like 4 hours away. So they set up this office in Spokane, and they said they were going to need a computer person to work there. And I'm just like talking trash. I'm like, well, if you want the best, let me know, and I'll come out and I'll be your computer guy, which I had no intentions of doing, right? But then they eventually had an opening. They opened up that position, and they bid it, and they called me, and they said, hey, we are hiring a computer person, so if you're interested in that position, to let them know. And so I talked to my wife, and we had lived in Oklahoma our entire lives. We'd lived basically, other than the year we went to college in Weatherford, I had lived probably, within 5 to 10 miles of where I'd grown up my entire life. So we thought this would be an exciting adventure, and so I applied for the position, and I got picked, and had to move from Oklahoma City to Spokane, Washington, which is about 1,850-mile drive. And more or less, I had about a month between when I applied and when I had to start. So, basically by the time I turned in my 2-week notice, I had a week off to get up to Spokane, and then I started the following Monday. So I moved to Spokane, Washington, I didn't have a house or an apartment or anything lined up. I just drove across country and hoped that I could find an apartment, which now seems just like super crazy, right? And I had a 96 Dodge Neon. And so I loaded up all the stuff that I thought was important, which was every music CD, my computers, my Super Nintendo, my 13-inch television with the giant 3 on it that we talked about, all these things, and the Neon. Now, and my wife, she gives me a hard time because here are the things I forgot to take with me on this trip. I didn't take any bedding, so I didn't have a pillow or a blanket or anything like that. I didn't take toothpaste. Somehow I remembered my toothbrush, but not toothpaste. I didn't take it. Actually, yeah, no mattress, no bed, no nothing like that. So it was pretty poor planning on my part. But so what happened was, as I moved, I left Susan behind in El Reno, and her job, not her job, but what she was going to do is sell the El Reno house. So we had put the house on the market, and the other thing that we were going to do is sell the arcade game. So I told her, and I don't remember the exact number, but something like, I think they're worth like $200 each. So I would take 100, but try to get 200. So I sold them, and I didn't put an ad in the paper, I don't think. I think it was just like mostly word of mouth. Like I told coworkers I was selling arcade games, and people would come, look at them or buy one or whatever. But by the time I moved, I still had most of them, right? And so as I'm getting ready to leave, a coworker, and not like a direct coworker, just somebody that happened to work out there. I mean, I work with 5,000 people, so it's somebody who knew somebody said, hey, my husband has a convenience store, and he would like to come buy your games. And I'm like, oh, and this is great, right? because first of all, it's a convenience store, so they're going to get played, so I thought that was cool. And second of all, I thought a guy that owns a convenience store is probably just rolling in the cash, right? So he comes over, and basically, I think I had, at that point, 3 games left, and he offered me $100 for all 3. And if I could go back in time, like to any time in the history of the world, I would go back and punch that guy in the mouth. Because, it was everything that I hate about situations like that, where he was an adult, and I was barely an adult. I mean, I think I was 21 or 22, and he knew he had me over a barrel, that I had to sell these things before we moved, and he was just completely taking advantage of the situation and knew that I couldn't say no. I mean, I could have, but when I got to Spokane, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment for a year and a half, and there was no way I couldn't even afford, we bought or rented a box truck to move our stuff up there, which my wife and my dad drove up there, but I didn't have room for 6 arcade games. Just the logistics would not have worked, so I knew I had to get rid of those games. And then, to add insult to injury, he says that he will take the Star Wars game, non-working as is, for free as a favor to me. He will haul this game off as a favor to me. And I was I remember being so mad. And what makes me madder is that I did it. I let him have the game for free, which, I mean, on my part, it's probably good karma, right? Because I got the game for free. But, God, I might go back in time twice and punch him, and then go back and punch him 5 minutes later. Just really makes me mad to think about it now. But at the time, I couldn't even see. All I could see was that I had to get rid of those games, and that I couldn't take them with me, and that they had to go. And so that's what I did. I got rid of them. I basically gave them away to this guy who probably flipped them. He probably didn't put them in. He probably didn't even have a convenience store. I don't even know if that was his real name. I don't even remember his name. But, yeah. So, basically, as we moved out of El Reno, out of the 120-year-old house or whatever, I got rid of that collection. And so those 6 games are what I refer to as the El Reno collection. Those are the games that I had when I lived in El Reno, and then when I left, I got rid of all of them. So, one question that I wrote down here as a talking point is, would I own them again? In other words, if I were rebuilding my own little home arcade, which I am not doing right now, but if I were, would I buy any of these 6 games again? So let's run down through the games again. The first is Elevator Action. Would I buy Elevator Action again? I love Elevator Action. I know not everybody loves Elevator Action. I know I don't think the guys at No Quarter loved Elevator Action. But I love Elevator Action. Probably partially it's just because I liked it as a kid. I liked the spy aspect of it. I liked playing it. I don't really remember where I first saw that, but I do enjoy the game. And one thing I like about Elevator Action is I think I've got to the 3rd level a few times. I may have got to the 4th, I don't know. But what I like about it is it's not like Qbert or something. Like, I had a Qbert machine, and to get to my high score level, I'd have to play for like 30 to 40 minutes, something like that. So Elevator Action's not like that. I mean, my highest score ever is probably, less than 10 minutes. So I do like that you would gear yourself up, play around, or play a few rounds, and then be done with it and come back to it. So now, would I own Elevator Action again? Probably not, and we may hear this a few times, but it's easily maimable. In other words, it plays very well in MAME. You have a joystick, and you have 2 buttons, one for shooting and one for jumping. This is all stuff that translates great to MAME. I've played Elevator Action on iMAME on the iPad, and it plays just fine. So this is probably not a machine I would replace someday, even though I enjoyed it. Game number 2, Mania. When I think about Mania, I think about, we had Mania at the convenience store by my house. So during the summers, I would walk or ride my bike or later my go-kart up to the convenience store, and we would spend all day playing Mania and Asteroids and Track and Field. And it was a contest. I think there's either 4 guys or 5 guys, 5 opponents that you have to go through to get to the championship belt. And then after that, you just randomly keep playing opponents. I've never tried, but I suspect I could be the world record holder of this damn game. I don't, like many games of that time, it's presented in a 3-dimensional manner, but it's actually a 2-dimensional game. So what that means is when you move, you're looking at a wrestling mat, and when you move up higher or back in the game, you're on a different plane, and so the character that you're fighting can't turn. Like, he can't turn to his right and punch, like, up on the screen. He has to move up and then punch left where you're at. So once you realize how the computer program is running, all you have to do to get away from somebody is to move up or move down. And then they have to follow you. So to beat Mania, to beat any opponent, go near them and then move up or down onto a different plane, per se. And then when that character starts moving down towards you or up towards you, you're already punching, and they just walk into your fists of fury, and you punch them several times and knock them to the ground. And once they're on the ground, you can throw them into the ropes 2 or 3 times, do some flying elbows or reverse flying kicks. And then once you get them on the ground, you could go up on the turnbuckle, jump down 2 or 3 times, and you repeat that entire process, move up, move down, punch them a few times in the face just for good measure, throw them into the ropes, knock them down, 2 or 3 jumps off the turnbuckle, and you pin them. And then you go to the next one. You can beat every opponent in about a minute, and then you just repeat it. Literally, I will repeat it until I get tired of playing. Like, I have played games of that where I just quit because I was bored or because I had to go to work or do something. But there are times where I feel like I could play that game forever. Now, what does end up happening occasionally is your opponent will get the upper hand at some point, and then you can never turn loose. It's like if you've ever played ER Kung Fu and pole gets you in the corner, and then you just get a face full of pole 20 times, and you're dead. There's nothing you can do. And so that does occasionally happen in Mania, but as long as you keep moving, up or down and staying away from those attacks, I feel like I could play Mania pretty much forever. So maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll try playing it forever. That sounds like a fun time. So anyway, you know what? I've seen... God, this is going to go off topic. I'm going to do this really quick. But I have seen some people do some fundraisers for arcades. They do fundraisers for, like, sick kids or something. I don't know. But they do it by playing games. I should play Mania for 24 hours. I'm going to get a camera. I'm going to figure out how to do this. We're going to raise some money for professional wrestling. Because for old broke wrestlers, I know Jake the Snake Roberts just did a Kickstarter. I just saw that. So we're going to raise some money for Jake and all the poor wrestlers out there. I don't know. If I could find something good to do a fundraiser for, I would do that. I would play Mania for 24 hours. Anyway, would I own Mania again? Probably not, for the same reason that I wouldn't own Elevator Action again, and that is that it plays just fine in MAME. It's a 2-button game with a 8-way joystick, so the controls are pretty easy to emulate. I do like Mania. Mania is, as far as games that I enjoy playing, it's up there in the top 10, top 20, somewhere like that. Like, I really enjoy Mania. But, it's just... it just doesn't, and it's not very challenging, and I don't know, I can't see tying up the space a game requires for Mania. So, moving on to number 3, Shinobi. Would I own another Shinobi? Well, the funny thing is, I have owned multiple Shinobis. I have owned 3 Shinobi machines. After I got rid of the El Reno Shinobi, and I started collecting games again, I found a second Shinobi. and I bought that Shinobi, and I played it. But in the back of my head, I was always worried about that battery going bad. So I went to an auction, and I found another Shinobi, and I bought it. And I called it my spare Shinobi. So when people would come over and they would say, why do you have two Shinobi machines? I would say, because this is my main one, and that's my spare one in case anything ever happens to it. And what's funny is the spare one did develop the stupid sound issue. Because I never turned it on. So it was off, and that battery was never getting any electricity, and I think that's what caused it to start going bad. But, so, yes. And by the way, do I think that's ridiculous? Yes. I think owning a spare Shinobi machine is pretty ridiculous. But, so I did it. So I've had a lot of Shinobi machines. Would I own another one? Probably not. Partially for the same reason that I mentioned before. Shinobi has 3 buttons and an 8-way stick, so, it's not that difficult to emulate. The other thing is, because the hardware issues associated with those Sega games. I had a Blockseed PCB, and it has the same problem now. It's died because of the suicide battery. Same thing with the Shinobi. I think maybe Altered Beast has the same problems. I don't know, there's a website out there that lists them all. But so I would probably steer clear of that just because, unless I was willing to find the unencrypted chip and do the burns and do all that stuff. But also Shinobi, I don't think came in a dedicated cabinet. I think Shinobi was only sold as a conversion kit. So it's not like there's the nostalgia of saying, oh, well, this, looks like a Shinobi machine. I think all my Shinobi machines, one was in an old, like a Williams, like a Defender cabinet, and one was, I don't remember what one was, just a generic cabinet, and I don't remember what the first one I had, the El Reno one, but, yeah, so there's not that nostalgia factor for as far as the cabinet or the controls. They're all kind of different, so I probably would not buy another Shinobi again. Next up is Street Fighter II Championship Edition. And unfortunately for it and Power Instinct 2, well, Power Instinct 2 I wouldn't buy again because it's a horrible game. So that solves that problem real quick. Street Fighter 2 I probably wouldn't buy, but I would probably buy if I were building a home arcade game. I think you have to have a fighting game or two. I think people love fighting games, and it just depends on what era you like. Are you the 80s, in my arcade, when I had everything going at the old house, I had Karate Champ, which I love Karate Champ. My offer is still out there. I get to be player 1, but anybody wants to play Karate Champ for money, bring it. So we've got, I'm calling people out on the podcast. We've gone off on a terrible, terrible tangent. So you've got that era. You have the 90s, the Mortal Kombat, the Street Fighters. I probably wouldn't get another Street Fighter, but I probably would get a Mortal Kombat machine. I had, I had a Mortal Kombat 1, and I had a Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which is always a crowd pleaser because, there's so many different playable characters on Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 that, no matter who people want to play, they could go find them. So, and I would probably, like I said, get at least one. It's hard to call Karate Champ a fighting game. I mean, it is, but it's not like the 90s one. So maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't get another Street Fighter 2 game. I definitely would get another Mortal Kombat. I would definitely not get Power Instinct 2. I have only played Power Instinct 2 once in MAME just to confirm that that's the old game that I had, and it was. So, yeah, Power Instinct 2. You know what? I'm going to take a sidebar here. Type in YouTube Power Instinct 2. Let's see it. There is Power Instinct 2 playthrough. Yes, this game is so horrible. There's an old lady right now that says ready. They're like generic Street Fighter 2. There's a ninja. That guy's name is Yakuto, but it looks like Ryu. I remember this game is so terrible. Keith Wayne versus Thin Nin. I mean, it looks just like a Street Fighter 2 ripoff, you know, but I don't see the girls that I remember on there. But anyway, boy, what a terrible game that was. Yeah, I would never own that again. And then let's see, what was that? Oh, the last one was Star Wars, and I mean, I've seen Star Wars games for sale. My friend Dean has sold Star Wars games. He had a sit-down version of Star Wars. I mean, I would love to have Star Wars, but a couple of things. Number one, I mean, that game is so repetitive. I mean, you only have 2 levels, and I'm not particularly good at it. I mean, I enjoy it, but I'm not. I mean, I could blow up the Death Star maybe twice in a game, and then I'm pretty much out. So I'm not great at the game, and I just won't pay the prices of a Star Wars cabinet. I mean, I was joking earlier on the podcast about being a big spender, moving up to the $100 range, but I could count on one hand the games that I paid more than $300 for. Actually, I could probably count on one finger the games that I paid more than $300 for. I could count on one hand the games that I paid more than $200 for. So, that was my range for buying games. I was a $100, $200, $300 range kind of guy, and Star Wars games go from anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, and I just won't. To me, it was just never worth that. I like it. I'll play it when I see it, but to tie up that much money, I just can't justify that in my head, especially knowing that, it's something that's going to need repair eventually. I'm always afraid of XY monitors. Vector monitors scare me. So, yeah, I probably wouldn't, but if you buy one, I'll come over and play it. So we'll make that deal right there. So anyway, that is the El Reno collection. Oh, you know what? I was going to talk about the pictures. So this collection predates cell phones, and it might predate when I had a digital camera. I don't remember when I got my first digital camera. It does predate. I don't think I got a digital camera until later on in the 90s. So I didn't have a digital camera, and I didn't have any pictures of these games. But what I did have at one point in time was this thing called Snappy. And Snappy was this little blue device that plugged into the parallel port on your computer. And it had RCA inputs on it. And so what it was for is you plug this in, and Snappy had some software. And you could run a videotape into your computer, and it would display it on a window, and then you would click, capture, and you could capture or Snappy. You could snap screenshots from those videos. Now, you couldn't record moving video. You couldn't import like a whole videotape, but you could take snapshots from a VCR or from TV or whatever. And so at that time, I had a camcorder that Susan and I had bought, and so I had recorded like a little video walkthrough of the El Reno house. So I have some pictures of the outside of the house, and I have some pictures of the arcade. Now, I think the Snappy default resolution was 640 by 480, and it still, it didn't look great because the source is, VHS or whatever, and on the in my little arcade room, I think what I had done is turn the lights out so that you could see the monitor screen. So I had this video, and I used Snappy, and I had gone in and I had taken snapshots from this film. There's really like 5 to 10 seconds of footage of this room. But it was enough where I had gone through the room slowly, and I had taken snapshots with Snappy of each game. Now, I no longer have the videotape. I don't know where the actual tape went, but I do still have the JPEGs, the snaps of those. So that's where the pictures of those arcade games came from. And that's really the only history that I have of those machines. But I did, in one of the pictures, you can see the Power Instinct 2 marquee on top of the machine, which is how I figured out the name of that game. But anyway, yeah, so that's really the only thing that I have from those machines. I have those little screenshots that I use Snappy to get from the tape, and the tape's gone and the games are gone, so that's all that's left. So anyway, I think this pretty much covers the El Reno Arcade Collection. We will be back next week with episode 130. I've got a couple of ideas on the drawing room board, so we'll see which one I go with. They're not all strictly technical or arcade or game related. I've got one show idea on backwards messages in music. Like when we were kids, that was such a big deal, so I've been thinking about doing that. I have a show topic called Reclaiming Spaces, which is about selling off arcade games. So just some different stuff there, but we'll see. Usually I decide Saturday, sometimes Saturday. Sometimes I work on them through the week. Sometimes I don't settle on one till Saturday. But anyway, that's it for episode 130. So thanks again for tuning in to another episode. I want to thank our sponsor, Hex Crasher, with his website, arcadeperfect.net. And like I said, you can find Hex Crasher on Twitter at arcade_perfect. So go check out arcadeperfect.net. If you have feedback on this show or any show, you can send me your feedback. You can email it to me at robohara@robohara.com. Or you can always leave a voicemail message for me on the You Don't Know Flack voicemail box, which is area code 206-309-9501. Thanks again for everybody for listening. Thanks out there to all the other podcasters. And that's it for this episode. So we'll see you next week on another episode of You Don't Know Flack.